Hello everyone and a warm welcome to Red Ice Creations Radio. This is Henrik Palmgren and we are coming to you from Sweden in Scandinavia. And wherever you might be, I'm glad you're here and tune in. The website, as you know, is redicecreations.com. News from around the world and beyond. On our site you'll also find our radio archive, newsletter, film material, a forum, and much more. We also have a member section on the website. If you're a subscriber, you'll get full access to our radio archive, all our extended interviews, and you can take a look at our short films, and we are currently working on the follow-up to Longevity and the Grail. Also in the process is a live audio and video feed, and we hope to announce a date for our first stream soon, so stay tuned to redicecreations.com. Much is going on here. Alright, today our guest on the program is David Wilcock. He's a lecturer, writer, filmmaker and researcher of ancient civilizations, consciousness science and new paradigms of matter and energy. I first heard David Wilcock through some information that was related to Edgar Cayce a few years ago. David is the co-author of The Reincarnation of Edgar Cayce, and this in itself is a fascinating story, and maybe parts of that we could talk a little bit about later on in the program. But right now David is involved in a film work or film project entitled Convergence that I would like to talk about. I also want to discuss David's work with the Enterprise mission that Richard Hoagland is behind. And we're also going to talk about the three-part series, a musical soundtrack and content series that is based on the Convergence material that is called Science of Peace. So as you hear, we have a lot to talk about here today, so basically I want to dive into it right away. So let's say welcome to our guest. Hi David, great to have you here. Thank you for coming on Red Ice Creations Radio.
Well, thank you, Henrik, for inviting me. I really appreciate it, and I'm honored to be here.
Excellent. I know that you're involved in a lot of different projects and have much to do, so I really appreciate you, taking the time to be with us here today. And, there's so much to say about your background, all the different things you've been through and been part of. So I would actually encourage people right away to get on over to your website if they want to read some of your background. You have an excellent bio up there. The website is divinecosmos.com, and you can read that bio there and much more articles and fascinating material up there for you. So if you don't mind, David, I would kind of like to focus on what's going on now,
Sure, yeah.
So let's begin with the film, Convergence. I've only heard a little bit about these pieces here and there. What I would like to ask you here is when did you first get this idea? When did you hatch the idea for this film project?
Well, the original idea came about as a result of someone who was a film producer seeing me speak when I was in Los Angeles 3 years ago. And actually, I was just meeting with him. His name is Billy Blake. About 5 minutes ago, right before we went on the air, he came over to my house. This is an ongoing process. It's something you may not expect that it would take that long just to get to a finished screenplay. But what we're trying to do is something that has never been done in a film before. Typically, this type of material that we're talking about, which I'll get into what that is, ends up in a documentary. And that's where we started for the first year. The material that I go into when I'm lecturing, and the material that's in the Science of Peace series you mentioned, essentially focuses on DNA. And I know that a lot of people who claim to be channelers or intuitives are focusing on DNA and acting as if it's a really strong essence of how we interface with spirituality. And the problem has been really that whole field of channeling in general is kind of in a shambles. There's very rarely do you ever see two channels who agree on anything, and there's a lot of divergent mythologies. Each one seems to have its own pantheon of good guys and bad guys. And basically, you're also dealing with a lot of unscientific assumptions. And if you just state something that you don't have any backup for, like like the one that you hear all the time about Planet X is coming in, or the one that you hear about your DNA is going to turn into 12 strands.
Sure.
Some people claim they've photographed things in the sky that's Planet X. It turns out not to be.
Yeah, lens flares. Yeah.
A lot of people say, "Oh, you're going to activate your DNA," but they don't have any proof for it. Well, one of the things that I've done is I did work as an intuitive counselor. I do have my own mystical contact. I do readings, or I used to do them for clients. I stopped doing them in 2005. But I ended up funding myself, so I had a lot of time to do other things besides working, because the funding was coming from about 8 to 10 hours a week of work. So the whole rest of the time, I didn't watch TV, I didn't party, I didn't do any of this stuff. I was always reading, researching. So there's years and years of time in which I literally was probably doing 14 hours of research a day for over 10 years. And that research all came together, and some of the things that I found did start to focus on DNA. And I found, especially from Russia, a whole bunch of intriguing research that shows that there is a consciousness field. It's not just, consciousness is not just something in the mind. It's actually the energy that goes into making matter. We have a ridiculous scientific belief right now that everything in the universe was created in one explosion at the beginning of time.
Sure.
And that ever since then, it's a static universe and it's just expanding. But everything was created. Well, it's really preposterous, and there's even things that we could talk about, like expanding Earth theory, where if you look at all the continents on the Earth, you can shrink the Earth to 55% of its current size just by removing the oceans. And all the continents fit together like a perfect little jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah.
And there's Neil Adams, a famous comic book artist who's got a website, neiladams.com, and that's NEILADAMS, and you can look on his website, and he's done movies where he shows not only the Earth expanding, but the Moon and Mars and, Ganymede on one of the moons of Jupiter. I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah, really. I think I saw this, actually, YouTube clip, of Earth expanding.
Yeah.
Amazing stuff.
Oh, yeah. Now, let's just talk about that one anomaly for a second, okay? Because if that is true, and you can look and see the proof yourself, where the cracks line up perfectly as you shrink things down.
Sure.
That proves right off the bat that physical matter can be created from apparently nothing, because we can't see or measure any apparent energy source that's flowing into these planets that would be sufficient to cause them to have such massive increases in their physical size. So that actually is a proof that establishes a base reality that we can work off of, which is that matter as we know it has to be drawing off of some hidden energy source in order to sustain itself. And the Earth is a perfect example. We have been led to believe, without question, that the interior of the Earth is made of iron. The only reason why they say that, basically speaking, is because iron conducts magnetic fields. And they think, well, the Earth has a magnetic field, therefore it's got to have an iron core, period. Well, this is ridiculous. There's actually plenty of evidence to show, especially from Russia. In Russia, they call them vacuum domains or natural self-luminous formations. A lot of people might call them UFOs without realizing that in some cases, when you see these balls of light, it's just another natural physical phenomena that our scientists don't really acknowledge. But you have these balls of light that have very strong magnetic fields, and they can be attracted to or reflected from other magnetic sources, as well as having a whole bunch of other strange properties, including things like anti-gravity and even consciousness. They seem to respond to people's thoughts.
Really?
So this is what's really powering the Earth's magnetic field, and it's also these balls of light that are kind of a much larger form of what's inside the atom, really.
Right. Just wanted to squeeze this in. I've heard theories about that actually gravity is an effect of that the Earth is expanding. What's your ideas about that?
That's absolutely correct. The Earth is expanding as a result of an etheric energy flow, or ether is a good name for this hidden energy. You can call it hyperdimensional energy or whatever. The Russians call it torsion fields.
Mm-hmm.
But etheric is a classic word, so we'll stick with that for now. So there's an etheric energy that flows in to make matter what it is. In mainstream science, you can find plenty of documentation when you look for things like dark matter, dark energy, zero-point energy, quantum field, quantum fluctuations, quantum vacuum, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
Virtual photons is another one. Anyway, you're dealing with an etheric energy flowing into the Earth to create it. And then some of it also flows back out. That's an important point. It's a bidirectional flow. If you have two people in a tug-of-war, and one of them pulls harder than the other, the one who's pulling harder than the other is going to get the rope to move towards them.
Sure.
But you got forces on both sides. So the actual movement is a lot less than the force that's being applied. It's just that the movement is only what you see. So gravity is only what we see of two forces that are fighting against each other. When you think about it that way, you realize that the actual amount of energy flow is much stronger. In fact, if the backflow from the Earth back out, which you could call the anti-gravity force or the levity force, as some people call it, if that backflow wasn't there, the flow of energy going into the Earth is probably so strong it would crush us flat instantaneously.
Sheesh.
So it's important to understand that gravity is a dynamic balance of two opposite forces. And the only reason why we get pushed down is because the one that's going into the Earth is stronger than the one coming back out.
Interesting.
So that answers your question.
Very interesting. So this is the kind of, you were talking a little bit about the Russians, of course, also in there, and some of their amazing work that they've done. I've read a few reports on the connection between consciousness and the DNA and how that affects everything from words and colors and intention, you know.
Oh, yeah.
Is this the kind of material that is in your film, Convergence?
Well, that's not an easy question to answer. The Convergence film is actually the first in a trilogy, and we may even do more than that, but that's what we've planned so far. And some of the things that I've already been telling you are things we have to work up to. What we're basically trying to do in the first film is to essentially establish a foundation that the average world population who's not necessarily metaphysically inclined can sort of have as a cornerstone. So you can imagine what it's like, and I've done it many times, when you have this mountain of information, and then you're trying to go in there and find one specific thing that you can pull out and then sort of build a story around as a string of information. So no, we don't. There are Earth energy vortexes in the movie. We do have some of that, but primarily what we're trying to do, we're not even really talking in the first movie about like the fact that this consciousness energy is also what makes matter. In the first film, what we're really trying to do is simply establish the fundamental reality of consciousness as a non-local energy field, and more specifically. And this is where it dovetails with the Russian studies, how consciousness interfaces with the DNA molecule so that you essentially have the DNA acting almost as like an antenna for really what amounts to where our mind actually is. Here's an interesting thing that we were going to put in the script, and I don't think it made it in the latest rewrite. But think about a near-death experience, right? Somebody goes brain dead. Their brain is not showing any brainwave activity. And yet, in many, many instances, they continue to have a fully cognitive process. They continue to think. They continue to react.